Alright, so the film we had was Adaptation. It was written, the screenplay was written by Charlie Kaufman, and it was directed by Spike Jonze. It was released in 2002 and is considered a comedy metafilm, which is a film about a film. And essentially, Charlie Kaufman wrote this film about his process of making the movie. And so it starts out with him being handed this book, The Orchid Thief, and his producer is telling him, hey, make a film out of this. And so he just wrote the screenplay for another movie, The Making, Being John Malkovich. And so coming off the success of that, he puts a lot of pressure on himself to really create this beautiful film about this book. But there is no plot, really, to the book. It's just, there isn't any driving elements to it to make the film really something that people are going to want to watch. But he doesn't want to make it classic Hollywood where adding in like the triangle, like drugs, violence, and sex. And so going through that process of really trying to create something out of a book that doesn't really incorporate any of that gives him immense writer's block. And so that generally takes up the first part of the movie, is him struggling through writer's block and trying to create something with that. His brother Donald lives with him, and Donald is inspired by Charlie's profession and decides that he too wants to be a screenwriter. And Donald creates a script about everything that Charlie does not want to portray. He creates a script about a serial killer who has multiple personality disorder, and instantly it's a big hit. Everything that Charlie despises. And so, going off of Donald's success, he finally decides, hey, I'll work with Donald to create this script because I'm getting nowhere with this. And through that starts a chain of reactions where it evolves from Charlie trying to create the script to a more dramatized version of the book. Instead of interspersing his plight of trying to write about the book with portions of the book interspersed, it just does a whole Hollywoodization of drugs, the triangle of drugs, violence, and sex, where they follow the author Susan Orlean, and she apparently is in a love triangle between her husband and John LaRoche. And so John LaRoche is manufacturing a drug from these orchids, which they take, and then she's his lover, and Charlie followed him. Charlie and Donald followed them and are caught. And finally, Susan decides that Charlie must die for catching her in the act of having sex with John, because her reputation is at stake. And so Charlie is forced to drive at gunpoint by Orlean to the swamp, where Orlean tries to kill him, but with Donald's help they're both able to escape into the swamp. Orlean and LaRoche follow them, aren't able to find them in the dark, but come morning when they both try to escape, they're spotted. Donald is shot. There's a car chase scene, but they hit another truck trying to escape from LaRoche and Orlean, and Donald dies in the accident. And so, coming off of that, Orlean catches up again and tries to kill Charlie, but in the act of cornering him again in the swamp, LaRoche is attacked by an alligator and dies. And so, going off of that, Charlie fixes his life. He decides he knows how to finish the play, and that is how the movie ends, with him realizing this is how I want the movie to end, and I wonder who will play my actor. Alright, onto the movie.
As Kelly was talking about, the movie is an adaptation of The Orchid Thief, which was a book adapted from a New Yorker article, both written by Susan Orlean. So it is an adaptation about making an adaptation of an adaptation, which is probably why it's called adaptation. It starts out with Charlie is just trying to adapt the book directly and make it as close to the book as possible. But during his extreme writer's block, he decides to write himself in. So it starts adapting real events. It's almost like a dramatized documentary. And he said he was very passionate about not adding more to the story to make it more Hollywood. But in the end, he adds a secret affair, drugs, a chase scene, 2 deaths, all of which are fabricated, even though the initial parts of the movie were real. Despite the additions, it does keep very well with the theme of longing and disappointment that was originally from the book. For example, there's a lot of discussion of longing to be passionate about something. And there's also the disappointment of what the movie became that the viewer experiences, because Charlie talks a lot about in the beginning about how he didn't want to change the book, but he ends up changing it completely. The main differences are really with the additions, because the parts of the book that are adapted truthfully are almost right from the book and very truthful, but he adds himself in and dramatizes it a bit, and then he adds the thriller part of the movie. Donald is not a real character. Charlie Kaufman does not have a brother, but the rest of the characters are real people. However, Charlie did credit Donald with writing the script and dedicated it to him as if he had been a real person who had died. LaRoche dies in the movie, but he is still alive to this day. John and Susan were not in a relationship, and Susan is not a drug addict. And in fact, the orchids cannot actually be made into a drug. The orchids are real, but the drug is not. There was a couple of storytelling strategies that were used to help tell the story. There was a genre switch, a lot of foreshadowing, and the involvement of the viewer. The story feels very real in the beginning, almost like a dramatized documentary. You feel the awkwardness and the embarrassment of the character Charlie in his scenes. You're really meant to feel like you're in his shoes. You feel his frustration and his anger with the society and the way movies are typically written. But as there are more and more dramatic changes, it becomes more distant, and it focuses less on the emotion and more on the action that's happening. There are a couple major scenes of foreshadowing. There's the more obvious ones where there's a scene in the swamp where it focuses on the alligators when we first go into the swamp, and then later in the final scenes of the thriller part of the movie, the alligators kill John LaRoche. There's some more clever foreshadowing, such as in the beginning, Charlie's talking to one of his employers, and his employer suggests that they have Susan and John fall in love, which isn't what happened in real life, but it's what Charlie ends up writing into the movie. In addition, Donald writes thrillers, and when Charlie asks him for help writing the screenplay, the screenplay becomes a thriller very quickly. And another very clever point of foreshadowing is right before Donald dies, he has this quote, "You are what you love, not what loves you." and Donald loves thrillers, and he ends up dying in a thriller. The involvement of the viewer is you're sort of meant to experience the film. Like I was saying before about the theme is longing and disappointment. Initially, it's just sort of discussed, but in the end, you feel the disappointment of what the movie became. There's also, disappointment that Charlie went against his initial passion to keep the very faithful adaptation of the book and changing it. And you feel sort of disappointed in yourself because most viewers will probably find the first part of the movie pretty dull and the last part more exciting, but then that's not what the movie was initially supposed to be, so you're sort of disappointed that that's the part that you liked more. Oh, and the character Donald can be seen as a critique of how audiences think movies should be written.
So the cinematography of this film, we start out the film with a handheld camera, and it is pretty much shown as a documentary, which sets the tone for the movie as being realistic and based mostly on real-life events. So the first time we're shown the swamp in the movie, we see the alligators, which goes back to what Amelia was talking about with foreshadowing. And this happens almost every time someone new enters the swamp. We see a shot of the alligators, which continues to show the foreshadowing of John LaRoche's demise in the film. Also, while we are in the swamp, we are mostly shown handheld shots, so it feels like we are walking along with whoever's in there whenever they're walking through the swamp. During the film, there's many medium shots and constant shots switching back and forth between Donald and Charlie talking, and this is kind of a clever way to get across that Nick Cage plays both twins, so it's kind of an easier way to have them both in the same shot. During the movie, every time Susan and John are seen together, most of the time these shots are very brightly lit, especially when they're talking in the van, and this can kind of convey their happiness of being together and the connection that they feel whenever they're talking. There's a specific scene that I found interesting where Charlie, at a lack of knowing what to do with the script, goes to talk to Susan, and he gets on this elevator, and because he's so insecure, he can't get off at the right stop to go talk to her, but when it comes back down, she gets on, and right before she leaves, he almost musters the courage to talk to her, but he doesn't, and the camera kind of stays on him as she leaves the elevator, which kind of shows and emphasizes his disappointment in himself and how insecure he is as we see his emotion. Because the ending of the film turns into a thriller, when this happens, a lot of the shots become darker and more handheld and very active, and this kind of shows the thriller-esque kind of feel to it, and this really signifies the shift. Now, in this film, I noticed two particular shots of montage that were used a lot, those being intellectual montage and rhythmic montage. The first intellectual montage that we see is at the very beginning of the film, where Charlie exits the studio where he was helping with the movie, and he leans against a wall and he starts asking a bunch of questions, and the last one he asks is, "How did I get here?" This switches immediately to different scenes of the earth and nature and evolution, and it finally ends with the birth of a child, and we can assume as the viewer that this is the answer to Charlie's question of how he got here. Now, a second one is, this happens quite a bit through the movie, is we see Charlie's character attempting to write the script, and then we flash back 3 years to Susan and John constantly showing how they progressed and how she was writing her article. And this is interesting because we usually see Charlie try to write something, and then we see it kind of happen, or sometimes it's even the other way around where we see it happen and then we see Charlie write it, but this is our way of kind of connecting the two through the intellectual montage. there was a scene that I remembered where John is talking to Susan in his van, and they're talking about the ghost orchid. And we sort of flash back to John and his Native American friends, and we see all of his Native American friends kind of high on this drug that's supposedly supposed to make you focus more. And then as we switch back to the van, John immediately starts talking about what's happening and how you can extract this drug from the ghost orchid, which Amelia said cannot actually be done. Another intellectual montage that happens is when John and Susan are in this big flower place and they see orchids and they start talking about them. And John immediately starts talking about how orchids often look like the insect that is attracted to them. And then we cut to a bunch of scenes of a bee being attracted to this orchid that looks a lot like a bee. And we can sort of get what John is talking about through this montage. A rhythmic montage that happens a lot during the film is when Charlie's trying to come up with ideas for the script. He will often take out his tape recorder and start saying ideas to himself, and as this happens, we get a bunch of rhythmic cuts as he jots down new ideas, and usually it ends kind of with him in a slump, being sad and saying that those ideas kind of won't work.
Alrighty, so the sound in this film, most of the time, not most of the time, but frequently, the film uses voiceover for the actors to really show their inner turmoil and their feelings and what they're going through, to kind of help put the viewer in the character's shoes more, so that they can relate to what they're going through at that time. And such as in the beginning of the movie, Charlie's cataloging his own faults, and it's just a dark screen with his voice, and I added the link for you guys to watch.
Does anybody remember what's up?
Ads.
Sundays.
Birthday.
Can y'all just give me a nice happy birthday?
Do I have an original thought? Maybe if I were happier, my hair wouldn't be falling out. But for sure, I need to make the most of it.
No.
But, this part of the film didn't have any film accompanying it. It was just showing the credits of the film as he's filmed.
Maybe if I were happier, my hair wouldn't be falling out. But for sure, I need to make the most of it. Today's the first day of the rest of my life. I'm a walking cliche. I really need to go to the doctor and have my leg checked. There's something wrong. The dentist called again. I'm way overdue. If I stopped putting things off, I would be happier. All I do is sit on my fat ass. If my ass wasn't fat, I would be happier. I wouldn't have to wear these shirts with the tails out all the time. Like that's fun anyway. Fat ass. I should start jogging again. 5 miles a day. Really do it this time. Maybe rock climbing. I need to turn my life around. What do I need to do? I need to fall in love. I need to have a girlfriend. I need to read more, improve myself. What if I learned Russian or something? Or took up an instrument? I could speak Chinese. I would be the screenwriter who speaks Chinese and plays the oboe. That would be cool. I should get my hair cut short. Stop trying to fool myself and everyone else and think I have a full head of hair. How pathetic is that? Just be real, confident. Isn't that what women are attracted to? Men don't have to be attractive. But that's not true, especially these days. Almost as much pressure on men as there is on women these days. Why should I be made to feel I have to apologize for my existence? Maybe it's my brain chemistry. Maybe that's what's wrong with me. Bad chemistry. All my problems and anxiety can be reduced to a chemical imbalance or some kind of misfiring synapses. I need to get help from that. But I'll still be ugly though. Nothing's going to change that.
So, other than the voiceover, generally the background music is kept unremarkable and out of the way to really focus on the loneliness and emptiness around Charlie as he's trying to write the script. He's trying so hard, but there's almost silence around him. Other than that, there was a particular point where the sound really came to the forefront for me when Orlean was forcing Charlie to drive at gunpoint to the swamp, and the seatbelt indicator was on. And normally it's a really annoying sound, like you just buckle up right away and just shut it off, but it was on. And it became almost like a metronome for the remainder of his life, and it really emphasized Charlie's situation and how there didn't seem to be any way out of it. There was no way to shut off the noise. Classically, when the movie starts Hollywooding, it classically intensifies during the chase scene to raise the tension of the scene. And there's another point where Donald starts singing the song Me and You by the Turtles to get Charlie's spirit up and show him that through their brotherly love and connection that they'll always be together and they'll be happy together. And so I added that at the end, but we don't have to listen to that.